Appamada's programs and facilities are supported through your generosity. Your support really does make a huge difference. You'll find a link for contributions on the website at appamada.org/contribute. Thank you so much.
Well, you came back and that's a good sign. So let me give you a little bit of an overview of where we're headed. So today I'm going to give you a little bit more about Graves' research, just so you understand where this comes from. Then I'm going to talk to you about the levels that we talked about on the individual level. So what it means for the individual. And then tomorrow I'll talk about these levels in spiritual community, and we'll sort of walk through them as they apply to the evolution of community and the development of community. Thursday, I'll talk about the sort of different phases within a level of entering, and then that sort of a middle, and then exiting a level, and the change process, what actually happens in that change process. And then Friday, we'll wrap up these connections between spiral dynamics and belonging and Appamada. Does that make sense to you? Yeah. So we're kind of moving outward from the individual, right? That's the way that I like to start. Okay. So I will say that generally speaking, I'm very skeptical about attempts to classify human types or personalities. Ranging from astrology and the Enneagram to the Myers-Briggs and other contemporary classification systems, right up to the DSM-5, which is used to diagnose mental illness, at least for insurance companies' purposes. Categories have their uses, of course, but too often they get appropriated and used too broadly, too judgmentally, in distorted ways, and too rigidly. Social scientists know that the diversity within a category is generally far greater than the diversity between categories. Most categories reflect the biases and purposes of the people who create them, and put things a bit too neatly into boxes from which there is no escape. That is, the categories themselves beg to be filled. There's a great article about this called "How a Learning Disability Acquires a Child." In it, parents and teachers are very concerned about a young child, a very young child, who seems to be struggling with reading. So they decided to do some testing and have a staffing to discuss the results and what might be needed for the child, right? Meanwhile, the child caught up with his peers and was reading at his grade level. Still, the staffing appointment had been made and everyone convened. The parents and the teachers felt that nothing needed to be done. The child was doing fine. But the psychologist's report had already concluded that the child had a learning disability. So the child was identified for remediation for the learning disability. Consequently, his peers refused to work with him on collaborative projects. They ostracized him on the playground, and he was subjected to unnecessary special development treatment that was not only unwanted and unneeded, but gave him a profound sense of his own deficiency. This creates a cascade of effects across a lifetime. Right? As you can imagine. Now, of course, many people repudiate categories of every kind, or simply create new categories. Gender fluid, non-binary, spiritual but not religious, which is, of course, such a yellow level way to think. What made Claire Graves' biopsychosocial model of human development, with its stages, so different? Why does it seem to have such profound and useful applications? For me, the answer is in the great care that Graves took with his research and how robust it has proven in all the decades since he developed his model. And it's kind of a shame, I'll talk about this a little bit, it's kind of a shame that because he became incapacitated while he was in the middle of preparing all of his manuscript, he didn't get out to conferences and promote it and get known in journals and all of the ways that these kinds of models actually become current. So First, he came into his study with no idea in mind other than to try to discern for himself whether there is one true model of human development, healthy development, or whether there are many. So he was just trying to sort that out for himself. He was teaching courses that were surveys of current theories of human development. So they covered behaviorism, and they covered, Carl Rogers, and they covered all of these different models. And he himself could not say that one was correct. And the students would ask him, well, which one is right? So he felt that each theory had some grain of truth, but didn't have the whole story. But he didn't know. So it's worth considering the brilliant way he designed this research. He had several hundred students in each of his developmental and abnormal psych classes. He asked them to hold off on any reading at all and write at the beginning of the semester their own definition of a psychologically healthy human being. So these were short papers, maybe 2 pages at the most. They turned that paper in. Then he put them in small groups with the task of tearing each other's definitions apart. That was the job, in small groups. They were then assigned to turn in a second version of their paper, revised in any way they wanted, following their peers' critiques, right? Finally, after doing all the reading about the different theories of human development, they met with Graves for a conference in which he rigorously critiqued their definitions as the authority in the field. So they were then to turn in their final definition with any revisions they wish. From this, he ultimately could discover what about these papers, what about this particular level of thinking was subject to the criticism of peers, what was subject to the criticism of authority. So he carefully tracked the changes they made, following their peer reviews and following his critique. It boggles my mind. He did this semester after semester for 20 years. So he had 600 papers from each class. And he did this every semester, so he's aggregating and accumulating all of these papers. So, and of course, what to do with all that data. Jessica knows that the hard part of research is not gathering data. Data is easy. Right? How do you interpret it? So he had 600 papers from each class. And he wanted to eliminate any possibility that his own biases would somehow affect what the interpretation was of these. And he had no idea what he was even looking for. So he got 9 readers for each class, and each reader, working independently, read every single paper. And his instruction to them was simple. If they seemed to fall into any groups, might be 2 groups, might be 100, we don't know. If they seem to fall into any groups, put the papers that are like each other somehow in groups. And if you have any that don't fit in any groups, just set those aside. So he had these 9 readers, each one of them was reading all of the papers and making the groups. Then he brought them together and he said, see if you have any agreement among the groups that you've created. And what he said was totally astonished him how much agreement they were in. He said it felt almost as though they had been colluding because so many of them had exactly the same groups, right? And when they came together, they could easily, make the groups. So they had these groups. And so now, and when he looked at the papers in each group, they didn't somehow seem similar, but how? How were they similar? These were undergraduate papers. And there were now 4 groups, 4 pretty solid groups. What are they? So he was just totally baffled. And this is the wonderful part of this detective story where he was completely mystified for 10 years. He kept going over the data. He kept going, what is it? What is it about this paper that's like this other paper? What is it that makes it different from this paper? Student papers, they have been given no, kind of notion that there's some theory that they ought to have, or headbanging mystery. He struggled with semester after semester as the papers are sort of piling up, and it's like becoming more and more clear that there are 4 main groups, and it doesn't matter how many semesters they go down the road, there's the same kind of 4 groups and they all fit together. So, so then he's got this 10 years of headbanging, and I just have to absolutely applaud his commitment to this project. Meanwhile, his department's like, you're not publishing anything. He would not publish anything because he had gone to a conference where Maslow presented his very famous hierarchy of needs and got reamed by his colleagues because no data. So he was determined he was going to have data, and he sure enough had lots of data. So the groups just proved robust, but there were distinctive differences. So meanwhile, he had given these students, since they're in psych class, all the batteries of psychological tests that you can in order to determine, well, was there some difference, like one had a higher IQ and then all the people in that group were higher IQ? No, that had nothing to do with it, or any of the psychological tests, there was no distinction. So he was really getting more and more baffled. And then he started to look at what happens when students make a revision and change groups, So let's say the groups are A, B, C, and D. Students invariably went from A to B, but never from B to A. They went from B to C, but never from C to A or C to B, right? So there was a sequence. There was a kind of a sequence. As they changed in a direction. That was his first real breakthrough, is to realize, when they change, this is actually a developmental model. They're developing. So that direction was invariable. No one went in the other direction. So he began to look more closely at the writing. And although he was not looking for this, noticed that students were actually expressing their own values, not an objective definition, and that those values were organized in ways that matched others in the same group. The values themselves were not the same. One student might write about obeying the 10 Commandments, another in the same group might write about military discipline. So it was not the values themselves, he realized, but the way they were organized that was the same. That was the breakthrough that he had been struggling for all these years. Meanwhile, he had published nothing, and he didn't want to provide any speculative theory, something that wasn't well grounded. So he then broadened his research to other populations. He studied archaeology and anthropology. He wanted to study what were the earlier stages that we might account for, what might come later, and he really became kind of a polymath, reading in all of these areas to try and discover what was it about these levels of development. Ultimately, he did begin to write his book manuscript, meticulously describing his research questions, methods, and findings. It's a great detective story to read. However, he had a heart attack before he could actually finish the book, and it would languish for many years until Natasha Todorovic and Chris Cowan took over with full access to his archives and completed the book. They had been his students and became his friends, and they said, we will complete this manuscript for you. And they took all of his notes and all of his archival materials, and they finished the book. It's a big, massive tome, but wonderful. So here's what he discovered. You don't need to take notes. I'm going to give you a handout tomorrow, not today. The current sort of maps on the model. His name for it was the biopsychosocial model of human development, which everyone found too bulky, and they began to call it spiral dynamics. A pretty bad book was originally published as a part of a business management series around this, unedited and incomplete. And then they also attached colors to these levels, which he was not that keen on. And he was always very worried about this model. He was worried that people would use it to describe people rather than to describe ways of organizing values. The book that they wrote is called The Never-Ending Quest. If you go on Amazon, it's about whatever, $795 or something like that, because it's a publish-on-demand book. So you have to go to their website, spiraldynamics.org, and that's where it can be ordered at some sort of reasonable price. We did have one in the library. I'm not sure it's still there, but it's a great read, because there's this mystery. How's he going to solve this, giant data dump, and how's he going to find his way to an answer? Okay, it's much richer when we can go than we can go into here. There's much more detail, but I do want to connect it to our themes of trust and community. So today I'm going to describe this model from the individual's level. Oh, okay, all right. It's not going to take that long because I'm going to explain about the colors. So from his research on anthropology and archaeology, he speculated about the earlier stages, but some of them you can still see, and the evidence for them is pretty compelling. The first stage is based on the life, I'm going to tell you the life conditions that are outside, and then the mind capacity inside, and then what that means. So the life conditions outside, just what nature and instinct provide. This is the beige level. He felt was the color of the savannah, just like basic humans roaming around the savannah. So you behave much as other mammals do. This stage in human societal development lasted many, many, many hundreds of thousands of years. The next development is the purple level, which is where there is a sense that the environment has a kind of mysterious harmony and reciprocity, and that natural patterns become meaningful. The tides, the phases of the moon, these things start to become meaningful and magical in a way. So there are things to be known about the environment. And so the internal development is to this impulse to placate the spirits. Everything is alive, the trees are alive, everything is alive. And to follow the ancestral ways and the wisdom of the elders, because the elders have developed wisdom that is passed down through generations, right? If these patterns, sometimes these large-scale patterns. And so ritual emerges as ways of pleasing these spirits. And people begin to form up into little bands following an elder or a group of elders that holds the wisdom that's going to enable them to survive and thrive. And then, so I'm going to explain something to you about this, what happens at each level. Why do things change? The success at each level creates problems and dilemmas that can only be resolved through transcending to the next level. So Thursday, I'll be talking about that change process, how that change process happens. But typically, so here's great success with people coming together. They've got the wisdom of the elders, they're in harmony with the environment, and they're beginning to be successful as these groups, right? It's these little tribes, maybe. So what happens? Well, there are people who are not that interested in sitting around the campfire and listening to the elders. They want stuff. They want things to happen. They want action. They might be teenage boys, I don't know. They want to go where something's happening. And the teenage boys are always like, let's go over to Jeff's house. I think something's happening over there. Let's go over to the schoolyard. Maybe there's a fight. It's just, they want to go where something is roving, And plus, these, purple level tribes have stuff. They've got some cattle. They've got some things that we want. They've got women, So their view of the world is that it's rough and hard like a jungle, dog eat dog. This is red level. The internal capacities are the fight to survive in spite of others, to seek glory, to avoid shame, and to express yourself. And this is really very tribal. So typically, the pecking order is determined by strength and power, and sometimes by violence. So that the whole quality that's essential is loyalty. And if you're not loyal, you're going to be, in a battle with the leader, right? Or you're going to be dismissed, or you're not going to get any of the perks or spoils of the war that you get engaged in. So that energy, that raw energy, and that little spark from loyalty is the little spark that begins to be faith, right? So it's a very proto form of faith, but it's the beginning of faith. So what happens then? Blue, the red level is forceful, vigorous, they're successful, they're getting the cattle, they're getting the women. They've run over the purple level, they've got what they wanted, they just take whatever they want. So, but now, as they get successful, their band gets bigger, it's a little harder to keep order, and it's a little harder to avoid all these challenges to leadership, right? And yes, they're successful and they're getting more and more cattle, more and more women, but there's a lot of conflict and chaos within the community itself, within the tribe, right? And I should tell you that you can see all of these energies in the society today. You can see that red energy go to any football game. You can see the red energy on display. So what happens then? What's going to actually conquer that red level mentality? It has to be something that is more powerful than the leader of the red tribe. What is more powerful than the leader, any leader of any tribe? God. God comes into the picture. God becomes a civilizing influence. There's order, there's hierarchy, and church gets established, right? So this is a way that even the red level leaders have to respect the fact that if you don't, like follow the rules, you're going to go to hell and die, well, opposite order. So the issue becomes order, structure, stability, and safety. And you can see blue level structures all over our society, right? Big corporations, the military, they're structured that way. There's a hierarchy. There's a person at the top who is absolute to be obeyed. Everything then is in hierarchical levels. Everyone knows where they are in that order. Everyone knows what the rules are. You're either in or you're out. You're in the Navy or you're not in the Navy. You're in the Catholic Church, you're not in the Catholic Church. It's very binary. And it's structured. It gives security and safety to people, and it allows sort of the growth of city-states, right? Because now we're not constantly at war with other red tribes. Now we have a structure. And then there can be hierarchically a whole category of people whose job is to protect us. There's a whole category of people whose job is to instruct us, so that we know our place in the hierarchy. And so blue level is very successful. Big cities started to grow up, and everyone was faithful to their religious beliefs, whatever they were, wherever they were. They knew where they were in that hierarchy. It gave some structure and stability. However, after a while, it starts to feel kind of confining and a little bit rigid, and those who want to express their own ideas are not welcome exactly. Those who have a different opinion or ask questions, not so welcome. There starts to be some fraying in that model. And what happens next is this sort of explosion of inventiveness, creativity, and all of the sort of energy of orange level, which is sort of like red level, and then it's very impulsive, very energetic, but it's more controlled and more managed. It's now got the benefit of coming through the blue level. So there's a little bit of structure there. But it's very common in sales organizations, for example. And these are people who will always rail against the rules and the policies, and I can't really get my work done, and at this level, everything is about metrics and measurement. So the way we know something is successful is from the metrics. And it's the bottom line, it's the accounting, it's all of the ways that people came to measure and determine whether we're being successful or not being successful, because for orange level, success is very important. It's very important to strive, it's very important to beat your sales figures, it's very important to get the award of the trip to Hawaii because you sold more than anybody else. All of that is very, very important. At orange level, it's very important to develop a microscope or to a telescope or whatever, very inventive, very creative. A lot of artists are working at this level. However, its own success breeds its own difficulties. So now you're at the pinnacle. You have the boat, you have the house, you've got the vacations and Zermatt skiing, but you don't have any friends. And your family has left you because they don't feel connected to you. And even if they're there, they've left you. So what are you? You're lonely. You have everything that's supposed to make you a success, but you're lonely. So obviously there's a kind of a breakdown there, and you have to reevaluate. What does it really mean to be successful if I don't have any connections, right? So the next thing that happens is green level, kumbaya. you know. Whereas the natural habitat, so the natural habitat for orange level is that the universe is full of opportunities for success. You know, plenty of doors to knock on, plenty of, you know, ways to succeed, plenty of opportunities. And so you're going to test options for success, and you're going to express yourself. No longer, you know, stuck in that cubicle with all the rules and policies and all of that. Okay, so now the natural habitat becomes living things. All of a sudden, the orange level realizes we're totally out of connection with nature. We're totally out of connection with other people. What happened? You know, so they begin to form interdependent communities. Their inclusiveness becomes the goal. We sacrifice ourselves for the community because we want everyone to feel included, everyone to be part of this wonderful, loving, caring community that we have. So there's a sense of a kind of, I don't know, it's sort of a Camelot feeling, right? It's like we are just really realizing ourselves together, and we're doing everything that we can to be together. However, the success of that also breeds certain dilemmas. There are people who don't actually fit in, who don't want to belong to what we're doing, who don't have any interest in that. And then it turns out there are, in the wide, wide world, many, many people we can't help. This is crushing to people with green level thinking, crushing. You mean yes, we have enough food to feed everyone in the world. We've just got to fix this so that everyone in the world is fed, right? And so what happens at green level is a kind of exhaustion and a sense of depletion. Like, I try and I try, it's never going to be enough. You know, like, I'm never going to give enough. Things are still always going to hell in a handbasket, you know, and the sense of, and there are actually people that I can't help, you know, there are terrorists, there are people who don't want my help, you know, and it's a kind of a crushing realization, right? I just don't have, so things fall apart, right? The community, there's a, you know, kind of a sense of tension, like, I can't do everything they want me to do. I can't do all the recycling and, you know, volunteering and all. I can't, I'm just exhausted, you know? So I don't know if you've ever noticed that. What arises is a kind of a breaking free in yellow level, which is a sense of the world around as a complex system at the risk of collapse and a looming scarcity of resources. Could we be at that point, do you think? And the internal capacities are to learn how to survive and understand. Flexibility and flow are incredibly important. And you express self with others, so there's not a sense of that individualistic sense so much as this sense of movement, of flux and flow. So Clare Graves himself never claimed that he had a whole bunch of students at this level. He said, I had a handful. And he said, but there were just a few who would say to me, yeah, I used to think that way, but I don't think that way now. And so that was his intimation that there was another level beyond yellow. Yellow level, all about flux and flow, and I started to have quite a few students who were thinking at this level. I saw that my son was thinking at this level when he said, I'm going to Beijing, and I said to him, well, you're going to Beijing, what are you going to do there? And he said, I'm going for a conference. And I said, where are you staying? And he said, I don't know yet. And I said, wait, you don't know yet? And I said, what are you taking? And he showed me, because he had put it up on Flickr or whatever. It was one t-shirt and 5 cameras, lenses, batteries, and all of that. And I'm like, you might need more clothes, just being the mom. And I said, you don't have a hotel? It's China. You don't even speak the language. You don't know anything about the money, you know? He said, I'm not worried about it, you know? And I'm like, okay. He flowed right into China, went to his conference, found housing somewhere, flowed back out again, you know, ended up with a partner in Finland. He would go visit a partner in Finland. This is the flux and flow, right? That he designed a lightweight medium format camera, medium format, right? Did he make a company because it was successful? No, he just made the camera, and that was enough of that. On to the next project. So this is flux and I'm like, what about the camera? And he says, well, yeah, we fulfilled all our orders. I mean, backup orders and everything. And I'm like, well, aren't you gonna do anything with it? He said, oh no, there's a big online forum where they're taking pictures with my camera and he's doing all the stuff. So it's like totally incomprehensible to those of us who have come up through a certain, process. So it's the flux and all about the flux and flow. So, but what happens? You're on flux and flow. You have a project in Finland. You have a project over here with some buddies. They're all short-term projects. You get put together with a team here. You might take two people from that team, form another team over here to do something entirely different. It's good-hearted. It's attempting to be a benefit in the world, but it's not trying to fix everybody. It's not trying to include everybody. It's just like, yeah, I'll go over here and help this happen. They might go volunteer in Africa for 6 months or whatever, but they're not going to do it through a structure. They're not going to do it through, the Peace Corps or something like that. So it's all flux and flow. But they get to a certain point and they're like, yeah, well, what does this all add up to? What does this all mean? Like if I've got this project and I did that project and I've got this mosaic of projects and a bunch of people I know all over the world, somewhat, what does this all actually add up to? I've got a lot of friends, like friends in China, I've got friends in Finland, I've got, but when you get right down to it, what does it really amount to? And the kind of stress of that is what leads to the turquoise level. And the turquoise level, as I said, Claire Graves said, he only had a tiny number of students who would, when they learned about yellow level, would say, yeah, I used to think that way, but I don't know. And it sees the environment as a single living entity, expanding and contracting like the breath as one activity. Internally, it seeks order and form within chaos. It's not trying to convert chaos. And there's a kind of cosmic consciousness. So self is unpersonal and unbounded. There's a sense of we're part of the cosmos, and in the flux of the cosmos, we're talking, hundreds of thousands, millions of years. It's like expansion and contraction. And this is exactly what the Buddha said, I have seen worlds expand and worlds contract across Choya cosmos, so across eons. And that's what he realized in this enlightenment, So we're, and so just in social terms, individually, we can feel kind of where our own values are held right now. We can see also the picture of what comes before, and all of that is included. All of that we transcend and include, so that in the moment that the external conditions match a certain level, we can respond in that way. If we had to take a job in a blue level corporation, we'd know how to follow the policies and the rules, and we know exactly how to do that blue level thinking. If suddenly, as happened with Hurricane Katrina, New Orleans was entirely put into the beige zone. Just, can we get water? Can we survive? And so people did that. They didn't lose their capacity to operate at green level or at purple level or at some other level, but they dropped into the level that was appropriate for the environment they were in. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. And that's why this is a double helix. It's always about what our internal capacities are in connection with what the environment is doing, right? So that's what's appropriate. If you find that you're in a blue level organization and that's where you are, then you have the capacity to meet those requirements to survive and thrive in that environment. And that's what Claire Graves felt. There wasn't a better level, and there's psychopathologies at each of these levels, by the way. There isn't a better level, but there is a sense of you have more tools in your toolbox, more capacity. The higher the level you are, you have more of those other levels that you can draw from as resources when the environment changes. So but the best thing is to be fit for the environment. That's how you survive and thrive. So is this making sense to people? Does it seem sensible? I know we're at the end of our time, but it gives you at least a sort of a base understanding. And I'll give you this little map tomorrow. It has everything on it. But I thought and when I was dealing with my students, I could see, they'll tell you, I mean, people will tell you within the first 5 minutes of conversation what level their thinking is at. Um, they'll talk about the safety in their current job, and the security of knowing where they fit in the organization. And, and right away, oh, they're working with blue level thinking there, they'll tell you how they've decided to open a yogurt shop. They left the corporation, now they're opening a yogurt shop, and then there's gonna be a yoga studio next door. So, oh, green level thinking, So you start to see those patterns, and that enables you to relate and connect with people in that way. So you can say, well, so are you planning to get a promotion in your blue level corporation, Are you, and the person with the yogurt shop, so how are you gonna know whether it's succeeding? Oh, they're gonna have numbers, right? So it gives you a way to connect with people who maybe have very different value structures than you have. And that's what I have found useful about it. My students or family, and I can see, and even when that fluctuates, so nobody is solidly one way of thinking, but I can see, oh, now they've jumped into orange level thinking, maybe I should start my own business, Now I can support that, or I can say, maybe it's not the right time, like the economy is not the best for doing that, So there's a way in which I can be resourceful and helpful for people when I can connect with the level that they're thinking. So, is that helpful?
Mm-hmm.
We're on a cosmic adventure, ultimately, and so it's helpful to have, for me, it's helpful to have kind of a map. This is what this looks like. This is developmental, and he felt it was sort of an open spiral, open at the top. He couldn't figure out, do these levels repeat? Are they going to repeat? Is yellow actually the new beige, right? Do they repeat, or do they continue? There's been a lot of speculation about that, but no data. And so, I feel like until people are willing to gather the kind of data that he gathered, they're speculating. You'll see a lot of speculation about spiral dynamics out there. And a lot of people placing themselves in turquoise because they're more enlightened than other people.
Well, that leads to my question I was going to ask. Are you going to talk some about kind of the landscape of Buddhist practice as social construct?
Yes.
Okay, good. Because there's the Buddhist way of expressing things. There's the Chan way of expressing things.
The Buddha went across all levels. That's why he continues to be a teacher, even as society changes and develops itself.
I'm just thinking, if you've got a Chan master that's willing to break a guy's nose over the description of the geese,
yeah,
where does that fit in?
That's red level activity.
Yeah.
It's red level, so you can see it's primal, right?
Yeah.
It's direct, it's primal, it's immediate. That's why we admire those, those old Chan masters. And there's a lot of red level energy in politics right now. A lot of red level energy. So we need the vigor that it brings. We need the energy that it brings, right? This is when we talk about sit with your hair on fire, right? It's that energy. It's a kind of a crucible for practice. So yes, I'll talk about this in terms of practice tomorrow, both individual spiritual practice and community. So there is definitely, you can definitely map this onto our spiritual development, and even onto the Buddha's teaching. I can, when he talks about the fire sermon, all is burning, all is burning. He's talking right to the red level people, the fire worshippers. And that was his rhetorical gift. His rhetorical gift was that he could talk to you at any level. So it's that's what's so interesting about this to me. It's like, oh, it has this tremendous utility. It's tremendously practical, not only individually, but socially and in groups. So yeah, so we'll talk about that more tomorrow. Yeah, if it seems interesting to you, does it seem interesting?
It seems like this is kind of creating as I'm talking, but if I'm at this level and I'm living in a community at this level or this level, how I would chafe at everything.
It depends. It depends, and I'll talk tomorrow about holding these values in a closed way or an open way. So if you're holding those values in an open way, you are curious. You can't quite comprehend that way of thinking, but you're at least curious about it and interested, you know. Holding it in a closed way is like, those people are tree huggers, you know. I want nothing to do with them, or, you know, like, you know, just rigid authority. I am not interested in hierarchies like that, you know, like, that's in a kind of closed way.
And those of us who, in different situations, feel like we don't fit, that may be
That's part of it.
what the miss is.
That's right, that's part of it. And so what the, in the concept of thinking about this in terms of belonging, which is sort of giving you a preview, what your goal is to make people at whatever level their value structures are, feel welcome. And feel like there's some nourishment here for them. So for some people, it will be in the forms and the structure. For some people, it will be in the kind of innovations. For some people, it will be in the bonding and connectedness. Now you can see, right? So that for me, there needs to be something for everyone. Yeah. So that's what gives the sense of belonging. And the sense of the richness of each of these levels has their place. And I'll talk about first tier and second tier tomorrow. About in first tier, you can't see the other views as having any value, you know. The only view that actually makes sense to you is the one that you're holding. But in second tier, you start to see, oh yeah, we want a lot of blue level values in airplane mechanics, you know, like we want, you know, like they start to see there's a place for every one of these values and a place for every person holding them.
So it kind of, I'm wondering if you're going to talk about this, because I'm thinking in terms of like just the individuals in IFS, like I can feel different parts of me and it feels like, oh, that one's operating at that level.
Absolutely.
This one's operating at
Absolutely.
this level. And so, and it's changing all the time according to the environment or
Right,
whatever.
Right, and different ones come forward. And so I actually gave a presentation at the IFS conference in, I think it's 2009, about spiral dynamics and parts, you know, recognizing that the parts hold values in their own way, and also then how to work with that. Second conference I went to, I talked about writing for parts, but this was really about spiral dynamics and looking at, and I will, this evening I'll introduce you to how to do that, you know, in a experiential way. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So far, okay online. Everybody okay? All right. I never know. You know, it's just like something you already knew, and you know, not that interesting or whatever.
Staring blankly.